Tolland typically does not have the lowest taxes, but it is one of the most predictable towns tax-wise in this region, and predictability matters if taxes is something you're looking to compare, especially when you're comparing East Hampton, Colchester, Marlborough, Hebron, Glastonbury. This difference does matter, and we're going to dig into it here. My name is Jason Boyce. I'm a local real estate agent here in Central and Eastern Connecticut, and I have passions for fitness, real estate, and family life with my wife Jasmine and our dog Holly. On this channel, we're going to cover everything you need to know about upsizing or downsizing in the state of Connecticut. Thank you for tuning in. Now, why does Tolland come up in the stable tax conversation? Well, the town is very similar throughout, so you don't have a ton of wild variation swings like lake districts and not, big commercial areas and not. It's very stable throughout, so you're going to see a lot of consistency. And to people who want to know generally what their taxes are going to be within a certain tax bracket, that matters rather than being careful depending on where in town you're looking. So let's dig into a little more detail. So quick refresher, property taxes 101. Remember, taxes are made up of two main factors, your mill rate and your assessed value. So the assessed value times the mill rate is going to equal what your annual tax bill is. And the stability in Tolland comes from evenly assessed values and how they're distributed throughout town. So in Tolland, there are just fewer extremes, which also means fewer surprises when you're looking at buying a house in town. Now remember, mill rate is only one side of the equation, but let's look at current mill rates in Tolland and some of the surrounding areas we do a lot of business in. Tolland current mill rate is 27.19 mils. Colchester current mill rate is 29.92 mils. Glastonbury current mill rate is 31.93 mils. Hebron current mill rate is 34.5 mils. Marlborough current mill rate is 37.74 mils, and East Hampton current mill rate is 39.71 mils. Now, what buyers typically assume from this is Tolland looks the cheapest on paper, with Colchester close behind, and people also think Marlborough and East Hampton are much higher. Not necessarily the case. We're going to take a look at that now because we're going to dig into how the assessed values matter. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at a bunch of properties that have sold to give you an idea of how the different towns compare. Now, we covered mill rate. We're kind of going to look at the assessed value side of things. So what I did is I set up a search here for, we're going to look at around the $450,000 valued home. Those are kind of the most highly sought after homes right now, especially within first-time home buyers. So I set up my price of closed in the last year between 440 to 460 in the towns that we do a lot of business in, that a lot of buyers come to me looking to get into: Colchester, Hebron, Marlborough, East Hampton, Tolland, Glastonbury. So here we go. We are looking at single family only, so no condos. So this house here in Colchester sold for $440,000 and the taxes were $5,800. This house sold for $441,000 in Colchester. Taxes were $5,300. This house sold for $445,000 in Colchester. Taxes were $5,900. This house sold for $450,000 in Colchester. Taxes are $7,500. Big jump here because the assessed value is higher on this one. This house sold for $450,000. Taxes are $6,200. This house sold for $450,000. Taxes are $8,000. So Colchester, you're seeing a range of $6,000 to $7,000-ish for most of the houses in the $450,000 range. Now we're going to jump to East Hampton, and these are just going alphabetical by town. So East Hampton, this sold for $440,000. Taxes are $6,700. This sold for $445,000. Taxes are $4,500. This sold for $448,000. Taxes are $6,800. This sold for $450,000. Taxes are $7,300. This sold for $450,000. Taxes are $6,900. So you'll see East Hampton and Colchester, for the most part, pretty similar taxes, unless you get right around Lake Poketipog, especially waterfront in East Hampton, that can spike tax values significantly. Now let's look at Glastonbury. So this sold for $440,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are $8,145. This sold for $447,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are $7,350. This sold for $455,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are $8,000. This sold for $460,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are $10,000. This sold for $460,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are $6,400. This sold for $460,000 in Glastonbury. Taxes are a little over $9,000. So you'll see Glastonbury is a little bit higher. Some of these hit $9,000, $10,000, whereas in Colchester and East Hampton, you are generally in the $6,000 to $7,000s. Now we're going to look at Hebron. So this in Hebron sold for $450,000. Taxes were $5,700. This in Hebron sold for $450,000. Taxes were $7,800. This in Hebron sold for $455,000. Taxes were $7,700. This in Hebron sold for $460,000. Taxes are $7,600. And that pretty much covers Hebron. So you're in like the 7,000-ish range. Now let's look at Marlborough. Marlborough, this house sold for $450,000. Taxes are $6,500. This sold for $450,000. Taxes are $6,000. This sold for $450,000. Taxes are $6,600. And give you one more Marlborough example. This sold for $460,000. Taxes are $8,300. So again, like any town, taxes are going to range based on assessed values, but you can see Marlborough taxes, you're generally in that $6,000 to $8,000 range. So just a little bit higher than Colchester and East Hampton, but about the same as Hebron. So, and keep that in mind as we're looking at this stuff. Remember, Marlborough had the highest mill rate, but the taxes aren't astronomically higher because assessed values play a big role. Now, let's look at Tolland. Remember, Tolland has the lowest mill rate. This house sold for $449,000, and taxes are $6,700. This sold for $449,000, taxes are $6,000. This sold for $450,000, taxes are $6,700. This sold for $450,000, taxes are just under $7,000. This sold for $450,000, taxes are $6,800. This sold for $455,000, taxes are $6,300. Now notice how we talked about Tolland is just more consistent. So some of the other towns, you had taxes in the $5,000 to the $8,000 range. See how everything in Tolland is just more consistent? We're all right around $6,000, $7,000. This sold for $456,000. Taxes are $6,160. It's just one thing Tolland's known for is their assessed values are more consistent. They don't swing wildly. So something to keep in mind. Hope that gave you some insight into Tolland taxes and how it compares to some of the other surrounding towns. So hope you found that helpful. How does Tolland compare to nearby towns? So East Hampton typically has the most variability, mainly driven by the lake, where you'll have wide swings, where you'll have lower taxes in the 5,000 range. If you're by the lake, it could be in the 8,000 range, maybe higher. Marlborough is going to be somewhat stable, but Marlborough, you're generally going to see, compared to Tolland, a little bit higher taxes. They have a smaller tax base, and it can swing a little bit depending on where you are in town. Hebron is kind of a middle ground. It is a little more consistent, but again, you could swing in this anywhere from the high fives to $8,000 range. Colchester is going to be pretty competitive with Tolland. However, you can vary a little bit more. Colchester has a little bit more commercial development. And Glastonbury is going to be generally higher overall, just due to higher assessed values. You saw some of those $450,000 houses in Glastonbury, taxes over $10,000. Tolland, it's just, everything's more consistent. You have more consistent housing stock, and the way the town does revaluation and assessment, there aren't wild swings. It's just more consistent, which means your taxes from house to house are not going to swing wildly. Now, who is Tolland a good fit for? If you want predictable home ownership costs, Tolland's going to give you a little bit more of that. They tend to not have crazy swings with revaluation. If you're budgeting month to month and you care about consistency, that's going to help. If you like suburban style neighborhoods, Tolland is a very nice suburb that a lot of people move to and stay in long term. And again, if you plan to stay medium or long term, I will do a link to a pros and cons video that dig into the Tolland, the entire town in general, a little more depth. So that'll be below if you want some more info on Tolland. Just a heads up, couple common buyer mistakes to look out for. If you're assuming low mill rate means cheap taxes forever, not necessarily the case. Tolland taxes are more steady, but as you saw when we were looking at that map, they are more steady currently for a $450,000 house in that $6,000 range. Whereas some of the towns, depending on location, you might have been able to get a little bit cheaper taxes in the $5,000 range, but in the same time, you also might be looking higher. So Tolland is just more consistent, not necessarily cheaper, although it is on the lower end compared to everything in general. Another mistake, ignoring assessed value trends. If you see assessed values continuing higher or wild swings within reval, just something to look out for and know as you're moving into town. Another mistake we see is some people comparing mill rates only. Like if you're just looking at the mill rate, not the assessed value, you can sometimes get yourself into trouble if you're on a tight budget. And then just not thinking long-term. Remember, predictability doesn't always mean the cheapest. It just means it's more consistent. We always recommend, when you're working with an agent, ask what the taxes are on each property, and hopefully you're working with an agent who's knowledgeable and can understand the swings in taxes and how that can impact your budget. You know, if we're looking at taxes at $5,000 to $8,000 within the same budget, say you tell an agent you're looking at a $450,000 house, that can dramatically increase your taxes by, close to $200 a month, or your monthly payment about $200 a month, which is a big deal to a lot of people. So, Tolland's not flashy from a tax perspective, but that's why some people love it. It is very consistent. It's not necessarily cheap, but it is predictable. There's not a huge variability, and it is generally on the lower side of taxes for some of the surrounding towns and the areas we work with that have good school systems and that a lot of people want to move into. Now, if you are considering Tolland, East Hampton, Colchester, Marlborough, Hebron, Glastonbury, any of those surrounding towns, I'm happy to work with you and help you run through real numbers. One of the things I really specialize in is everyone is in a different life situation with a different budget, looking for a different house. We help you make the best decision for you using data and helping you actually run through the finances and numbers so you understand everything that you're getting. If that sounds like something that would be helpful to you, we offer a free consultation for everyone. So all my contact info is below. Send me a message, call me, text me. I am super responsive. And if you found this video helpful, please smash that like button. If you know anyone else who would find this video helpful, please share it with them. And thank you for watching.